Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Conversation with Darin Ostrom. Been on with him before, sports card professor. We were talking about the efforts made in the 90s, especially at ProSet and some of the other companies, not all of whom are with us at this point, defunct now, but the attempts to reach kids. He dives deep. I love that. And so we had a good long conversation. This will be broken up into two parts. And thanks sponsors, Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Hugs and Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. So thanks, Darin. Very interesting 1990 ProSet fact, football and academics. What's the CT?
Cincinnati team.
No, it wasn't Cincinnati.
In 1990, it was because it was the Cincinnati School Board
I know it was.
put together.
Yeah.
Then the next year, in 1991, they went nationwide, so they changed it to a team.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. That's something that slipped me. Lud Denny in 1990 had huge favor with the licensing entities. He was a rainmaker, somebody that could do no wrong. And he was a super positive person. If he says, hey, let's do this, he just had a way of infectiously, enthusiastically saying, yeah, let's go for it. We're going to go into the classrooms. And it's going to be positive for football, good for the brand, obviously, with ProSet fronts and interesting backs. A lot of the blurbs in the books I did, whether I gathered up for somebody or did my own original. So I certainly had lots of good sources. And that was when we probably got some help from ProSet. We were across town. In fact, we were a few thousand yards from ProSet. So They came over, we went over there. It wasn't their production facility, it was their office facility, but it's where Lud was. But Lud was the golden boy with NFL then. So if he wanted to do something, they said, go for it.
This was spearheaded by the Cincinnati School Board because if you think about it, it would make sense for Lud to team up with the Dallas School Board. Yeah. But from what I've gathered, it was the idea of the Cincinnati School Board. They reached out to who knows how many companies, and ProSet was all on board and started with what was originally a regional team. The fact that it was called a Cincinnati team shows how community focused the project was to get all the kids inspired by this is about you. But then they were able to roll it out nationwide as an opportunity across the board, which that to me is straight up Lud. That is exactly the kind of thing I see him doing.
But he had to say yes to something. I'm hard pressed to think this was a moneymaker. This was a brand builder, community action, positive.
It was also sponsored.
It was sponsored, but ProSet had a huge operation, maybe billions of cards. Okay. So Cincinnati production was low on that, obviously being just in Cincinnati. So those are way tougher. And the fact sets got smaller and easier. The next year was still a little bit tough. Then after that, and then ProSet went away and Fleer jumped in, or Fleer was pulled in. You think Fleer came in willingly? The NFL, sometimes they tap licensees on the shoulder and say, you're in.
There is that, but it's also amazing marketing because you're literally giving kids your cards. And think about it, it's in every way a ProSet or a Fleer card from their set. It just happens to have some extra information on the back. It is a direct tap in to kids who, like myself, I never would have collected cards if it wasn't for the particular path I went down and stumbled into them. Literally, you have a captive audience of an entire class across an entire school board. I imagine that with Fleer, because they were still trying to define their place in the hobby in 1993 when they got started, I just see them as going, yes, this is the kind of marketing we need to tap into. Get kids thinking Fleer first, not Topps first.
Cy Berger always said, we're marketing to kids. It's a kid's product. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, increasingly adults got in with the profit motive. But even in the early 90s, there's still a lot of kids because it was a kid's priced product. It is funny, though, that the two companies that got involved with the fact sets, which I think are altogether positive, are both now defunct brands. ProSet went out of business and Fleer did not immediately go out of business, but it merged and then sold and then went out of business. But the regime in the early 90s there was a different group that were more hobby savvy, I think.
Yeah, and they went out of business for different reasons because in the case of ProSet, it was somebody who was all about enthusiasm, energy, and stretching himself too thin. And he just ran out of tarmac. Whereas with Fleer, they went too corporate. And I think they just lost the identity of what the brand was. And they were trying to run through the numbers in a corporate fashion. So they were polar opposites, as far as I'm concerned.
Still both, no more. No, actually, the brands have been resurrected. You still see Fleer through Upper Deck, and you still see Pro Set through Leaf. I think Leaf acquired the rights to Pro Set.
What I love about the 90s with cards is the unbridled creativity. Everybody's just trying to come up with something unlike anything else. Something like this, where a school board says, we want to take sports cards, which were always like a combination of nuisance for teachers and sometimes an incentive. They could be used as a reward. And
the punishment, they were confiscated.
I did hear that some teachers would hand out packs as like a reward. So it was that combination. So teachers threw up the white flag and said, all right, tell you what, why don't we reimagine them? Brilliant concept. Pro Set jumped in. And by turning it into a national affair, I thought that was a really great opportunity to spread it out so that kids across the country, instead of just Cincinnati kids, it was something that through 1996, nationwide kids were able to enjoy. But Pro Set did something more. They used that idea and they created the Think About It cards in their sets in 91 and 92. And that was like what Pro Line was doing with the messages on the back of the cards, straight from athletes. But when Pro Set could no longer continue that, that also became a part of the FACT program where they would be handed out as a complete 18 card set, not Pro Set related, that also continued through 1996. So they were thinking about it in two different ways, which I thought was cool.
And that was properties. That was the Players Association because it didn't have a large group of players. It just had a smaller 12 or 18, whatever it was, and not even one per team. So I'm struck by the fact that the 1990 FACT Cincinnati sets, cards even, are hard to find.
Oh, yeah.
If it was so successful, first of all, whether it's the educators or LUD, somebody was overly optimistic that they were going to do a one-a-week rollout. I think it was a 15-week program. Whereas later on, they did 6 sets.
Yeah, 6 sets.
Every couple of weeks. I think the rhythm of it might have been too intense.
Manufacturing was pretty, because it was the entire first series of Pro Sets.
Missing a few cards, which is not trivial. You have to pop out some and either put in some or put in the title cards or something like that. Switch out the back. It wasn't a no-brainer, but they had half the work done. I think that's your point and true. Also, it makes them difficult to distinguish. When you're looking through the fronts of cards, you're not going to detect the difference. In the thickness, you've got to flip it over and
read the back.
And for all this talk about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, when they do STEAM, they add in arts, but we forgot about reading. And fourth graders, surely all of them can read, but in some schools, not so much. And card backs contribute when you're going to answer the science question that's on the back of these cards or math or whatever it is, you still have to read the words. And I think cards, reading names, reading what became briefer and briefer card backs was encouraging of reading.
Definitely. The idea of blending sports into education is something that I think was a really big part of that as well. But you were mentioning about the Cincinnati cards being harder to get. They were regional, and most of the kids probably just threw their cards out. So it was just fourth graders in Cincinnati in 1990 who hung on to the cards. Those are the only ones we have. In some ways, I'm impressed we have as many as we do available, because it almost gets into, like with vintage cards, the exact same thing. There were a whole lot more of all the vintage sets post-war than were manufactured in Cincinnati, because we're talking, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000?
The key is not how many were made.
It's how many survived.
No, how many were not remaindered, because they printed up a bunch of them. And if LUD's involved, he's printing more. So they didn't overproduce. And if there were any left over, they were either destroyed or not in the possession of LUD.
But at the same time, the Cincinnati School Board knows how many fourth graders they have. So they could actually print to demand.
And if they were distributed legit, the problem is, and we get into a national program the next 4 or 5 years, but those next 4 or 5 years, especially the last 4 years, I think, they were remaindered.
Yes.
You find extra sets in the cello packs, and then you know something's up. And when you see it remaindered, it cheapens. But so many things in the hobby. The first year, it's hot. The second year, it's warm. The third, fourth year, it gets cold. And you beat this dead horse. And LUD could do that with the best of them. So maybe Cincinnati is the key. Now, fourth graders back in 1990, and they would know the population. Those are state records.
Actually, it's built to be a part of the curriculum, because with the 1990 set, The answers aren't even on the back.
I know. There's a teacher workbook.
It's my understanding that it was given out to the entire class and then it was used as part of the educational process. Then it could be like flashcards afterwards where the kids continue to have that information. The 1990 stuff, it's so difficult to find. I haven't found a binder or the worksheet or any of the adjacent information that goes along with it. Whereas the later ones, starting in 1991, those were all self-contained. Every header has a scorecard on the back, so they can keep track because actually it has points. They had binders that went along with it I've been able to get. So that aspect I know. Cincinnati, I haven't had the chance to fully see that.
Let me add something to that because, and I never think I'm typical, but I'm pretty sure Ludd gave me a binder. There was a blank binder, but it was in 9-pocket plastic sheets and it probably in numerical order rather than in group order.
I'm really curious about what Kramer was doing in 1991 with his flashcards, whether those were supposed to be sold on counters or whether those were distributed out to teachers. Because that's what I haven't been able to delve into. There were individual packages in a normal box, 36 count, the whole standard release. But I'm curious about the sales model he set up or if it was intended for schools.
Mike was a capitalist, but I don't think he was greedy. He wanted to have a lot of cards in his collection, but he had a good business sense about printing to demand and controlling production and costs and things like that. In 91, Kramer is this innovative guy who's misunderstood, but definitely a hobbyist to the core. And they may have let him run with it in a way that was not the typical licensed product, like a card license, like a mass-produced flagship, like a one-off novelty product. But I see way more of those than I do the Cincinnati Fact 1990 cards. No comparison. And more than the 91 Fact as well.
It's a lot easier to get the flashcards than 91 through 96 Fact.
Yeah.
They were also distributed differently because the Fact cards were literally cello-packs dedicated for fourth grade classrooms, whereas with the flashcards, they were built to be on a store counter.
These attempts to reach kids, I don't know what kind of focus groups they're using to figure out. I think it's a bunch of adults thinking this is what kids would like. Kids want what they can't have. They don't want what you're giving them. They want what the cool, bigger kids have.
The other part was the card sets designed for kids in the mid-90s, which was Fun Packs, Tops Kids. That is very much adults trying to figure out how to connect with kids. And I love how each one of those is a shooting star. Lasts 2 years and it's over. In case of Tops Kids, it's 1 year. It's almost like walking into the bones of a failed civilization because I look at each one of the 3 releases and I go, that's brilliant for kids. But why didn't they have a 3rd year?
Because it didn't work.
That's right.
And the one that bears further scrutiny is the Fun Packs, because that had so many different form factors. It had to be crazy putting that all together. And you would think that some of those concepts for unique kinds of card-like elements would have caught on, but it just fell flat, I think.
I have a feeling it was just too expensive. They were creating cards that were more ambitious than the audience was ready to engage with. They basically took Fun Packs and rolled that into Collector's Choice starting in 1995. You got to see the stickers and the stand-up cards, and you got to see some of that stuff survive. And I think that was the right place to focus on kids.
But those weren't innovative. But the Fun Pack was innovative, the way they put it all together, and it stripped away that innovation that largely, I guess, didn't work. You're still coming back to the 9-pocket plastic sheet. And if it's quite a bit thicker in that day, that was a problem. If it was a fold over, some other kind of thing, you couldn't display the card to its full advantage.
They were intended to be played with. You have the heat changing cards, and that is about the experience of causing the background to disappear.
There's collecting and there's handling.
Yes.
We have created a collecting hobby that does not involve handling, or at least rough handling, white glove handling. That's the problem with the kid stuff. If the kid gets a chance to touch the dad's cards, it's, hey, be really careful.
Yeah.
But then you get these cards for kids and these Fun Packs and things like that. Hey, open them up, twist them around, flip them over, and have fun with them because implicitly they're not worth anything. And the kids, says, I don't want some that's not worth it. I want some of these 52 tops.
There's like an on-ramp because Triple Play in 1992, I think was well designed for kids is a 1-year thing, an introduction where it catches their imagination, pulls them in, they explore it. And then once they're familiar with it, it's time to move on to the next step. Having a 1-year training course type of a card set to introduce kids to cards, that idea I think is really solid. But kids by year 2, they're now ready to get to that more serious level. But that's if you're talking about 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. Whereas when I started, I was in the 8th grade. So I was never interested in that stuff. I was already at a more advanced level.
I have card company sponsors, and I know they listen. What I'm devising strategically in my mind as we're going through this is that the best strategy to reach kids in this hobby is to do one-off products that are limited in production, exactly the opposite of what they're trying to do. They're trying to have something that'll have a long run, that'll draw kids in, when really we want them to grow out of it. Okay. If you said, hey, this is limited, it's just for kids, we're not going to produce very much of it, the kid's going to say, hey, the adults want this stuff too. There's not going to be any year 2. I got to get it now. Fast fashion. Go to Zara, mostly for girls. It's on the shelf for 3 weeks and then it's gone and they don't make any more of it. And so you better get it because it's just there. And if they did the card sets for kids like that, say, hey, it's going to be there at the beginning of school in September and October, and that's it. And we're not making any more of it. And it's just for kids. Don't let the adults get it. Don't let the adults get it, kids. That's the strategy. And there's no year 2. Year 2 is going to be a completely different design with other concepts, and keep throwing things out there. Like you said, with the fun pack, you can learn from some of these things that seem to have interest and are worth the trouble of doing it. It's essential that we get kids, but marketing to kids through adults' lens or filter is probably not going to work.
Another big part of it is card shops need to be accessible to kids. Because if I walk into a modern card shop, all I see are sterile cases and cards trapped in plastic tombs. Whereas if I go into an old card shop where there's a tactility to it, immediately I'm engaged. For a kid who walks in and the counters are taller than they are and everything's walled off, that's not a place where they necessarily would connect. So I'd like for card shops to at least have a space in the card shop that kids feel at home in. If you go into a bookstore, bookstores oftentimes will have a kids area and it's all bright color and they have miniature furniture for kids to hang out. I'm not asking for a whole little place like that, but to have a place in the counter where a kid looks and all of a sudden it looks like it's right for them and they can touch things. Because for kids, touching things is critical.
Did you go to the National this year? Jeff Wilson had a kids zone. There was kids only. It was like a corral, and they weren't toddlers or anything, but it was for kids to trade with other kids and things like that. It wasn't thousands of square feet, but it was hundreds of square feet. But the kids' areas at the National were on the floor over in the corner, doing deals with each other. It's going to happen ad hoc sometimes, but making a provision for that in a card shop or in a card show, I think would be good. And trade nights. Could there be a kids' trade night where they're checking IDs? If you're over 15, you can't come. On the other hand, a 14-year-old can pretty easily take advantage of an 8-year-old.
Yeah, that's for sure.